Hey, my name is Ramirez. I'm Frog Bear. You can call me Rami. Today, I want to be talking about oil versus fuel, the Rockefeller story. Now, again, this will go into an episodic series of conspiratorial videos in the sense that people have conspired with other people in order to maintain hold of their power, maintain hold over certain situations, maintain hold over an industry, maintain a hold over, in this case, the use of a certain commodity, and to make sure that you crushed any other form of competition that could exist against the industry that you hold. Now, I actually wanted to start off this with a quote: own nothing, control everything. Now, this is the for those who don't know, this is only possible when you own a trust. This is only possible when you know how to not just own a trust, but own a corporation, owning an LLC. Essentially, putting degrees of separation between yourself and the assets, between yourself and what can you own and what can you not own. It's kind of like obfuscating tactics to make sure that you aren't necessarily aware of what he is in control over. Yes, he eventually had to bust down his own monopoly, but at the same time, right, one of the ways that I learned this quote, own nothing, control everything, was I was watching a video about divorce court and some of the ways that you could um, separate what you own so when you get divorced, you don't necessarily lose anything. And the individual who was explaining this he used this quote, own nothing, control everything, in trying to describe how a trust works to the audience. And I thought it was hilarious. So I have a video, as usual, and it is, why didn't I have it right here? Bam, okay. Monsieur Eddie Bravo, as usual. Big fan of Eddie Bravo. But this is well-known information. It's not like you can't find any of this. Like, this went to legislation. Not only did this go up to legislation, but it is still to this day an industry practice. Um, so let's move on.
Ruling the world, man. And the one thing is that all hemp or marijuana conspiracy theorists, they all are aware of the reefer madness propaganda. And finally, it worked after 10 years of all this propaganda that made weed look like it killed you and stuff and made you do crazy shit. They made it illegal. And we all know that that's from big industry like DuPont and the Rockefellers and all that. We all know that they were trying to shut down the industry. They were blaming it on this Mexican smoking weed. We all know that as
And it was all for optics, right? It's why the repeated lie, if you repeat it long enough, will eventually become the truth. And it wasn't just targeted towards us. This was targeted towards jazz bars. I think it was Rockefeller who hated jazz bars. He even had this whole expose written in a newspaper talking about how it was a Zionist plot to take over America and this and that. But to some degree, that should tell you that there are factions, right? Um, he obviously didn't like the Zionist faction, that he spoke out against them, which probably led to him either way.
weed enthusiasts. But you know what you don't know is, alcohol prohibition was also because of John Rockefeller. He supported anti-alcohol groups and blew them up and donated millions to blow them up to outlaw alcohol because he saw it as a threat to gasoline.
Right? And because he saw it as a threat to gasoline, creating the Prohibition era, he inadvertently created all of the new money. He inadvertently created all of these new, like the Kennedys are a great example of this. But Al Capone is who I was thinking of. All of these new money aspects, they all came into power at this time. And it is because I mentioned this in my video of St. Paul's School, where in St. Paul's you can clearly see that there was clearly a time where they started subverting these private schools into test betting certain behaviors among students. And I'm making that assumption and I'm holding that opinion because of how our education, or at least how students have largely ended up today, largely reflects what happened in those schools. And just because they're private doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have higher standards. But that goes into other stuff. Either way.
Whoa.
Yes, and this is not a conspiracy theory. Alcohol prohibition was all backed by John D. Rockefeller.
Whoa. It was a threat to gasoline?
Yes, alcohol.
Oh, now I remember. Basically, the people who were fighting against the prohibition era were all WASPs. So you could see how the old aristocrats, because this was highlighted in The Great Gatsby, because even in The Great Gatsby, it talks about that divide even amongst the rich. How there is the ecclesiastical rich that came from the old world, and how there was the new world aspect of new money that came into existence.
Because they thought people were going to make like ethanol?
He wanted to crush the ethanol business, right? But the way he did it is to create this hysteria with drink. Everyone has a drinking problem. Everyone's killing each other. So he did the same thing. He did both of them. He did the same. You're going to find out about this. This is not a conspiracy theory. He funded the Anti-Saloon League. It was run by one of his good friends. And you know what ended up happening? Same thing. They outlawed alcohol. You couldn't drink alcohol. But they said, what about the alcohol for cars? And they wrote in the law that you could still make alcohol for cars, but you got to put petroleum in it so that people don't drink it.
See what I'm saying? We like to believe that the current conditions that we were born into were efficient, were the best. It's like, yeah, you're right, that to some degree, something should have been done so ethanol wasn't, swigged out of the pump. Because there are plenty of videos that I've seen on the internet of showing people who will walk up to somebody pumping gas and they'll have a cup and they'll tell that person, hey, yo, pour me a cup of that gas. Like, these videos exist everywhere on the internet, but that's not what I'm highlighting. What I'm highlighting is the fact that when we go to the gas pump, we don't think about, is this the best and is this the most efficient fuel form factor for this car? None of us will ask questions about the history of how gasoline became to be what it is. Nobody will ask questions of how ethanol ended in the situation that it did. I just find it incredibly vexing, frustrating, that there were other ways, right? Because right now we're facing a fuel crisis or an oil crisis or whatever we want to call an energy crisis, but yet you can make ethanol out of anything that ferments, literally anything that ferments. But yet, because of something that somebody did in the past, like Rockefeller, you can't even make a car that runs strictly on ethanol, let alone be able to manufacture ethanol, because the government will come, right? Essentially creating a soft form of monopoly, thanks and aided by the government industry. So when we look at this whole thing of the wars in the Middle East, the Syrian pipeline, when we look at all of this and we view it through the lens of somebody went out of their way to keep and maintain a monopoly over this commodity. No, but none of us have ever questioned, was there ever another way? Was there ever another solution that we could have participated in?
So it killed the business. So now they got to put oil in it if you want to sell it. And then it killed he killed everything. And he got busted for everything.
Henry Ford said that alcohol was a cleaner, nicer, better fuel for automobiles than gasoline. Wow. Holy shit.
So the proof is in the pudding. There's a clear, demonstrable effect that you have seen people who have had the status, the money, the power, and the influence amongst friends in order to shape legislation, in order to shape laws, in order to shape industries. This all has this all has someone you can point to, somebody's signature, a bill, a legislation, a lobbyist group, right? And I find it, what really bothers me is the fact that people will not ask the question. They'll just, each newer and newer generation never asked this question. Each newer and newer generation never wanted to question the status quo, because when we are born into this world, we like to think that the world is as efficient as it can be, and we do not want to entertain the fact that sometimes certain decisions aren't made for the greater good. So next time you see these people complaining about climate change, next time you see these people complain about any of these other form factors of water pollution, air pollution, etc., look them in the face and realize that they've been lied to far worse. They're stuck in a form of Stockholm syndrome that I don't think they'll ever be able to get pulled out of, because they've been so polarized into believing the lies of this system that they don't even realize the fallacies that they're promoting, or how they don't make sense when you logically think them out. If we're facing an energy crisis and we need fuel for that crisis, wouldn't it make sense that we just start fermenting a whole bunch of fruit? How about instead of throwing all that fruit out from supermarkets, from local restaurants, how about we get all the food that can ferment itself, put it somewhere so it could start fermenting, so we can make that into a bigger form factor ethanol factory. But nope, we can't do that because somebody a long time ago decided that, oh no, you can't challenge my authority in my petroleum industry, that you have to now put petroleum in your product. It's like, what?
Wow, this is nuts, man. That is so crazy, because you can make alcohol without fossil fuels.
Apparently, any vegetable that ferments, you can use as fuel. Henry Ford said anything that you could ferment, apples, anything, you could turn into biofuel.
That's crazy.
And John D. Rockefeller, that's what he was all about. He's the richest man in the world.
So now when you think of that scene in Back to the Future, and you see Doc rummaging through the trash can, he gets like a banana peel, some orange peels. He basically gets biodegradable material, puts it in the cylinder in the car, and he's like, all right, now we got to wait a little bit. And that's how it worked. It's like, I find it incredibly interesting that people will belittle him, Eddie Bravo. They'll belittle the idea of being a conspiracy theorist, in the sense that you're just merely looking at history and theorizing people who clearly are conspiring not with just themselves, but they're conspiring with their friends, lobbyist groups, senators, mayors. Who knows how far John D. Rockefeller was bribing people left and right in order to promote this new product that he did not want to share with anybody else.
Was raised by a psychopath. John D. Rockefeller's dad was named, they called him Devil Bill. His dad, they know all about.
Okay, yeah, I've already mentioned this. Devil Bill would beat the shit out of his kids. Sorry that I really need to watch my language. Essentially, he created, I don't want to say that he raised snakes, but essentially he kind of did. He would beat them every day. He'd lie to them every day. He'd make sure that they were completely sharp. And he was considered a snake salesman. So there is all that. But again, I'm just here to highlight the fact that not everything in this world is as it seems. Not everything that we were taught is as it is. There is much more to say about what the term fossil fuel really means versus tar pits versus oil pits, but that whole conversation is a very difficult conversation to have. So next time you hear a leftist talk about water pollution, talking about freshwater scarcity, talking about climate change, well, you should educate them a little bit on John D. Rockefeller and educate them on, yeah, we had a better fuel source and we've had this fuel source for a very long time, but we can't use it completely because X, Y, and Z. We still need the petroleum because somebody back in the day decided to add that into legislation because Prohibition era was essentially what largely dictated making ethanol into the 80-20 rule that we have now. I think that's what it says on the pump. So, I don't know. I'll leave that video here because I don't really have much to say because it's pretty self-explanatory, especially after making my last video, that the industry does not care about us. The industry does not have our best interest in mind. And I think that's okay, because knowing this, we could move forward in the discussion with legislators, with our congressmen, with our representatives in the House. And now we could write more meaningful legislation as soon as everybody gets educated on the fact that John D. Rockefeller has largely shaped our view on the oil industry, the fuel industry, the energy industry. And let's not even talk about the hemp industry, right? Because that was all largely dictated because they didn't want to switch from using trees to using hemp. Keep that in mind. They did all that amounted to hemp was a better paper alternative. But because John D. Rockefeller, DuPont, and all of their friends didn't want to upgrade their machines or completely change out the machines, they were just like, well, I think it's easier for us to just make movies and to propagandize people. All for what? To create division between jazz bars? Because again, this all plays into jazz bars. This plays into aspects of division and segregation because, it was demonstrable, at least at that time period, that you could literally look and tell who was hanging out at these jazz bars, thus villainizing this aspect of things. But who knows? Probably John D. Rockefeller figured out that hemp and marijuana was used as a better biofuel that probably freaked them out. And it probably freaked them out even more than you could have done that with any other fermented vegetable or fruit. And how do you think they felt when they realized that they could start using petroleum-based synthetic products to make pharmaceutical industry-grade medicine? Nobody wants to go that far. Either way, my name is Ramirez. Hopefully I'll catch you next time.